Good afternoon, everyone, or good evening, or good morning, depending on what part of the world you're joining us from today. And thank you for joining us. We would like to welcome you to International Education Week, an opportunity to celebrate the benefits of international education and exchange worldwide. This joint initiative of the U.S. Department of State and the U.S. Department of Education encourages institutional efforts to promote programs that prepare Americans for global citizenship and invite future leaders from abroad to study, learn, and exchange experiences. Every year, many institutions celebrate International Education Week nationally and around the globe. And this year, we're not allowing COVID-19 to get in the way of that. As such, all international education departments of the Maricopa Community College District are hosting a series of virtual events to celebrate this year's week with the theme Global Equity and Justice. We're kicking off the week with our keynote event, Traveling While Black. Without further ado, please help me welcome our facilitator this afternoon, an incredible human being with a powerful voice for equity, diversity, and equality, and one of CGCC's most beloved faculty, psychology faculty, Dr. Belinda Ramos.
Kathleen, that was a most wonderful introduction. And now I have an introduction that I'm just honored to present today. We have with us someone we've been trying to have join us at Chandler-Gilbert for quite a while. And we're so glad that this day has made that possible. Tamara Thorpe, she was the first person in her family to attend university and travel and study and live abroad. Being the first in her family, it only happened because of mentors, those people who were powerful advocates in her life, powerful allies. And so in her keynote presentation, Tamara will share how one summer cultural exchange into a 30-year career in international education and training. And so she's visited more than 25 countries. Now, here's what's really outstanding about that. In 1990, less than 4% of the Americans held passports. Think about that, 4%. And today that number has increased to 42%, with more Americans traveling than ever before. And we know that travel is temporarily on hold. But after you hear her speak today, I know that as soon as you're able, you too are going to try to incorporate the passion, the beauty, the learning of travel into your life. There's so many more things that I could tell you about Tamara. Her traveling abroad, her starting her own company, her being willing to look for and find the best in others, to share her expertise just graciously. All of those are part of the keynote speaker who's going to be sharing with you today. So I'm going to stop talking and introduce you to the wonderful, the international Tamara Thorpe. Tamara?
Thank you so much, Belinda and Kathleen, for the invitation and the kind words and the opportunity to have a conversation with you and your audience today about international education. This week specifically about International Education Week, and specifically about traveling while Black. But I want to start my story like all good fairy tales. All good fairy tales begin with a dragon. And my own fairy tale of a life living and working abroad, it also started with a dragon. And if I can show you all very quickly this book is titled There's a Dragon in My Bed. And it was a book that I had as a child that I carried with me everywhere till the edges were tattered and torn. And I'm lucky that as an adult found a copy that I treasure. But this book was one of my favorite books because it was a French-English phrase book. It told the story of two children traveling around France, getting into tons of trouble. And it taught me, phrases that you might use when you travel in France, like bonjour, au revoir, But it also taught me things like il y a un dragon monde Mali. So I'm not sure if I ever thought I was going to have to use the phrase "there's a dragon under my bed" or "in my bed." But certainly, I spent a lot of time as a child reading the book and studying these phrases so that in hopes of going to France one day, I might be able to use the words that I learned in this book. And it was this book and the French language that initially sparked my lifelong pursuit of an international and global life and a love for language and culture and travel. Just recently, I was reminded by someone who asked me, "How is it that you ever and decided to live and work abroad? Such an unusual thing to do." And given what Belinda had shared, right? In the 90s, only 4% of Americans had passports, and today, just 40%. I think in some ways, an international global life is an unusual and unique opportunity. But I had that opportunity not because I chose it, but because I was lucky enough to have a mentor. And in this case, my first investment mentor is her. And my mother shared her passion and interest for travel and adventure with me as a child, since my own will. But those experiences that she provided me, exposing me to other languages, my book here, from taking us on vacations across the United States into unique areas where I learned about the diversity of my own country and how people within the United States were different. It was a really powerful lesson for me in learning, taking risks, and being adventurous. And I'm so grateful that she shared, created those experiences for me, because it gave me a willingness to try new things. One of my mom's favorite stories she likes to tell is a trip sending me to a summer camp. I went to summer camp almost every summer growing up, but one year I was going to a new, and I really didn't want to go. I wanted to go to the camp that I had always gone to, but she was sending me to a new camp, and I fought her tooth and all the way up until I got on the airplane to go, because I was terrified to get on a plane and travel so far away from home. I was only traveling from Los Angeles to Colorado, but it felt huge when I was 12. But that experience, and lots of them after, really gave me a curiosity about trying new things and going to new places. And certainly growing up in Los Angeles, in the city, I learned to be resilient and adaptive. And those qualities to flex my style and my approach were particularly helpful on my actual first international trip, which was a trip to Spain, which was a trip organized by my high school director. I had friends who had gone the summer before and kept saying it was great. And I really didn't know this experience was going to be something my mom was going to let me do. But I remember going home and saying, I have the opportunity to with some of the folks from my high school, with my high school teacher. And without hesitation, my mom said, absolutely, you can go. And it was that summer that Belinda referred to that really changed my life, because it was that summer when I got deeply immersed into a small town on a small island in Spain. I didn't speak any Spanish, that I had a really immersive experience. And it really gave me a sense of wanting to learn Spanish, wanting to know more about Spanish culture and how it was different from the people back home I knew that spoke Spanish, and how culture influenced the way we did things in life. And so I share that story all the time, because it was so significant and so life-changing. And in fact, it was there on that trip that with my high school English teacher, Bishop, that I said to her, what could I possibly do for a living that would allow me to travel the rest of my life? And she, thought, and she said, well, you could teach English. And on that moment, on that day when I was just 16 in high school, that I decided that I would be an English teacher and I'd spend the rest of my life abroad. I did, in fact, do that, but my path wasn't so straight, and I've taken different turns that I'm going to share with you today. But one of the things that I want to share was that not only did that experience really carve out my future in terms of what kind of work I would do and the kind of life I would lead in terms of living abroad, but something also really unique happened in that first experience. It was the first time in my life that I had experienced and understood my Americanness. And let me explain what that means, because as a Black woman with mixed heritage, I have spent a lot of my life fielding the question, what, with most people never really being satisfied with the answer. So I could say I'm Black, and people would say, really? I'm white. Really? Well, I'm mixed. Oh, is that like a mulatto? You get it, right? So no matter what I said, it wasn't enough. But when I was in Spain that summer and people said, where are you from? Or what are you? I got to say American, and that answer was enough. And part of that was, one, it was such a sense of relief to not have to explain more about my identity. But it also gave me a sense of belonging to my own country that I had never felt before. You see, when you spend your entire childhood having to explain to people what you are, that kind of othering creates a kind of disconnection. And I've really been aware of how disconnected I felt until I had that experience. It was a newfound confidence, freedom that I had found that I wanted more of. So I did. I spent the next few years of my life really cultivating an international life through my education and training. It's right after high school. I spent time in France and finally did my semester abroad in France, where I was able to use some of the words that are from the book, and then of course use more of the language that I had learned in high school and college. And it was when I was there, I really started honing my travel skills, exploring different places. And again, it was a different time. In the 80s and 90s, there was no internet. So we traveled with a big book called Let's Go. I had information about buses and trains and hotels and hostels. And so I really started honing skills as a traveler and somebody who was really passionate about other people and other cultures and learning other languages. When I returned to the U.S., it was a difficult re-entry process, not only because I had really loved and enjoyed my experiences abroad, but that tension of answering the question, what are, and that question and this struggle other people had with my identity really began to sting and create a lot of stress and anxiety for me, as I myself, as a young adult, was struggling with my own sense of identity, and this need that other people had for me to identify my race or ethnic background just became an overwhelming burden for me. So I continued to do the work. I did my degree. I got my certification to teach English. And before I know it, completely intended, I found myself living in Seoul, South Korea. How does one accidentally find themselves there? Well, my whole plan was to be able to South America and hone my Spanish skills. But because of the jobs that were available, I ended up taking a teaching position at a school in Seoul, South Korea, a place I couldn't have even found on the map if I had to. It was a country, not only did I not know where it was, but I didn't know the language. I didn't know anything about the culture. It was all so foreign to me. And so on top of, taking my first job at a university, traveling the country, I was going into something completely unknown. And it was actually really interesting because it was really in the first week there that I realized not only did I not know the language or the culture, but I was actually even illiterate, right? So when I traveled in Europe and you saw a restaurant was restaurant, toilette and toilet were the same word. I remember my first time when I was in Korea and we were in a restaurant and I went to go to the bathroom, and there were two doors, both with two Chinese characters on them and Korean words, and I didn't know which was which. So I started waiting to see someone come out before I knew which one to go into. So it was such a profound experience that I had there. And just like I had done in all the places that I had been before, I studied the language. I learned to read and write in Korean. I traveled the country. I made friends with locals and my fellow co-workers, and we explored all the unique features and cultural characteristics that Korea had to offer. And it wasn't easy, but I really, really enjoyed the adventure that came with it. But no matter how much I learned, no matter how much I explored and how much I enjoyed it, I was never going to be Korean. I was never going to blend in. And like a lot of my Western counterparts, were easily recognizable and struggling with that loss of anonymity we faced every time we left our house and walked down the street. But my Black friends and colleagues, we had an experience that was unique. We were unique foreigners. When we walked down the street, people would yell out the names of famous Black artists. People wanted to know if we could dance or sing. People were so eager to touch my hair. Sometimes I'd find myself standing at a street light waiting to cross the street and feel a stranger, a complete stranger, touching my hair or rubbing my arm to touch my skin. I used to brag when I would go to the bathhouses, how all the women there would fight to see which one could take care of me because they were all so eager to touch my skin. And this was the first time that my Blackness became part of my experience abroad. And it's continued to be my lived experience. And it's something that over the last 30 years of my life, I have come to understand in a much more complex and nuanced way the role and intersectionality between cultural competence, intercultural understanding, racism, and how that all fits together. For so many, it's easy to believe that race and colorism are exclusively U.S. issues, and that we can leave them behind when one of the things that's been reported in this last year is how many Black Americans are getting passports and looking to move and live abroad. So even though we know that Black expats is on the rise, and I know from my own experiences, they have found better experiences in other countries' lives where they feel less racial tension and animus in their day-to-day lives. But what we do know is that after the murder of George Floyd, that there were thousands of protests that took place all over the world. It was a global uprising, not just for people to demonstrate their solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement in the US, but also people protesting their own local realities and the racial inequity and the police brutality they experience their own communities. I know that in the US, in Europe alone, since COVID-19, there has been a rise in police violence in racialized communities. We know that in the UK, that Black, Asian, minority ethnics have more affected by COVID-19 than other communities. So we know that these kind of disparities exist. And so I want to share with you a little bit about how then does this all translate? Because as of today, I've traveled now to almost 30 countries, and I've lived for extended periods of time, France and Canada and South Korea, and now I live in Ireland. I've been based here in Dublin, Ireland for 4 years. And while my life abroad has been incredibly rich, it has come with its unique challenges as a Black woman. So I want to talk a little bit about the myths that I just referenced. This idea that racism and colorism is a US problem is a myth. The idea that you won't experience racism abroad is a myth. And also the idea that racism is the same everywhere. It's a myth. The truth is that racism and colorism are a global pandemic and are particularly visible in countries that were part of colonization. So that wherever Europeans went, as part of their strategy and wealth building, that they have left a legacy of racial inequity. I also know that racism, bias, and bigotry, they show up everywhere. Some of the world's most renowned organizations have to do the resume experiment in countries all over the world where they will have ethnic or African sounding names, and they see that those are selected far less than the counterparts, despite the fact that everything else on the resume is the same except the name. And so we know that racialized communities are having the same experiences. So even though racism has its unique quality characteristics in each culture, whether that's influenced by the historical context, the current political reality, what I have learned through my experiences is that no matter how it looks and what its origins are and how it plays out systemically in the everyday lives of people in any given country, those who experience it, those who are on the other side of the systemic abuses of racism and individual bias and discrimination, that the feeling is the exact same feeling. So does this mean that we shouldn't travel? On the contrary, I think more than anything, it gives us reason for why we should travel. My experiences abroad have taught me more about myself than it ever has, than anything else. And in my experiences studying, working, living, and I've gained such a deeper understanding of myself in a way that has really allowed me to be a better friend, mentor, daughter, wife, colleague, leader, and citizen. And I'm so grateful for the experiences that I've had, that I'm having, and will continue to have, because the more I understand my own cultural complexity, the easier it has been for me to understand others. So if I can just share with you one of my favorite quotes. So this quote comes from Edward T. Hall, strategist and intercultural pioneer. And I share it all the time because it's such reality that culture hides more than it reveals. And strangely enough, what it hides most effectively from participants. So when we think about our own cultural influences, right, where our values, beliefs, and behaviors come from, very often that can be difficult to see. It's much easier to look at another group, someone who's different, and recognize how they're different. And it can very often be difficult to see how we show up differently to others. So too often you might hear folks say, well, in the US, we don't have culture. They have culture over there. But the truth is that for people who come from all over the world to the United States, or people who never come and watch it from a distance, American culture is very apparent. And I think when we look at our culture and our cultural values, if there's anything we've learned this COVID-19, our culture shapes so much about how we see the world and how we respond to difference, change, and crisis. So I know that as someone who teaches intercultural competence, trains folks in global leadership, I know that understanding yourself and being self-aware is a core skill to developing intercultural competence and really being able to understand diversity in a way that we may not have before. So often we focus on learning about the other folks that we take our eye off of what are the cultural influences that we bring to a situation. And I know that the more I learned about myself and the complexity of my own identity, that I had more confidence, more self-esteem. I was able to be capable in my ability to problem solve, to lead diverse teams, to communicate across difference, and resolve conflicts, the things that have made me a great teacher, that made me a great trainer, a great manager, a great leader, and today an entrepreneur and a global citizen. And these are some of the really tangible skills that I've been able to use to market myself as an employee, as an entrepreneur, as a colleague, because these are the kind of skills, these are 21st century skills. Too often they've been referred as soft skills, but these are critical skills. These are the skills that international experiences and international education foster, and that you will not gain from other experiences. And let me be really clear, international education doesn't involve getting on a plane. There are so many opportunities in our communities, in our neighborhoods, in our schools to connect people that come from other parts of the world. And so I really like to emphasize, well, how critical international education is, how important it is to have those experiences living and being immersed in other countries and cultures. There is so much we can from and within our own communities. So I want to also share that these are that learning about other cultures really is just sort of the tip of the iceberg, right? We know, like any iceberg you see, that the majority of what makes up an iceberg is really below the surface, and what you can see is at the top. So when we think about learning from people who are different from us and learning about the complexity of culture, we have to do the work to see below the surface, beyond the music, beyond the food, beyond those connections. Because while those first experiences are really powerful, understanding more about what shapes and influences our values, our beliefs, and our behaviors is at the heart of developing cultural competence. You know, myself, when I talked about my Americanness, I know that, there are things because I'm American that I value. I value equity. I value independence and my own individuality. I believe in the pursuit of happy American dream. But there are other layers to my experience as an American that come from my family, my community, my cultural background, and the shared experiences that I have with other Black Americans, the unique Black experience of being American. And it can be very easy for be polarized by these differences. In fact, being polarized is a normal part of the process for understanding difference. But intercultural learning really helps us move past that to a deeper understanding of the complexity of differences. So they're not just polarized and also not just relying on our similarities. And so I don't want to get too academic, but I want to share with you all a model for understanding difference that when I first learned it, it was such a powerful way to look at and reference that I had gone through, because we know, as I mentioned, that my experiences have helped me develop these skills and self-awareness and intercultural understanding and leadership and global competence. But in terms of my actual view and my understanding of difference, this is the Intercultural Development Continuum. This is a model created by Milton Bennett and Mitch Hammer. And it's a really powerful model that shows how we as humans understand difference, and how over time, when we do the work, that our understanding of difference becomes more complex. So that what they are suggesting with this continuum is that we all, as humans, are born in our own towns, communities, families, we start our understanding of difference with in a stage of denial. And what that means is we don't recognize difference. And so when we think about children and how children don't learn, it's a really popular pictures that you see on the internet, popular videos of small children, right? Because they don't recognize those differences. And that sense, they have a full sense of equity with one another. And this can continue into adulthood, people who don't have exposure and opportunity to interact and get to know people who are different from them. There can just be a sense that all of us are the same and there's nothing different about anyone. And once people have some exposure and learn more about differences, they are going to move into this stage of polarization. And in polarization is a unique phase, because then we sort of first have this understanding that, yeah, people are different, but sometimes that difference isn't how I do it. So I'm going to judge it. I'm going to have thoughts and feelings about it. And when we think about a lot of conflict that comes between cultures and people, it comes from that judgment, right? That my way is the right way and their way isn't the right way, and people should be more like me. And too often we see this polarization. But I think one of the reasons I find this continuum so powerful is because I understand that it's possible for people to move out of polarization into a place of minimization. And minimization is a place we understand and recognize our differences, but we also recognize that we have some things in common. And so in order for us to get along and function, we really focus on what we have in common. And the interesting thing about this continuum is it also comes with an assessment that I administer with individuals and organizations, as well as thousands of other people around the globe. And we see from our set, really, particularly in the US, that the majority of people, including within organizations, are in this stage of organization, right? We recognize our differences, but in order to really get along and make this work, we focus on how we are similar. And this can be a really powerful place to be in if you've just moved out of polarization. But once you've been in a stage of minimization, really the goal then is to move into a stage of acceptance. And in acceptance, we have the ability to understand culture in a more complex way, so that not only so we don't just rely on what we have in common, but we're also able to accept other people's differences as a reality and as an alternative. And then once you're able to flex and adapt your own approach, your own style, you move into the age of adaptation. Now, most folks who lived and work abroad and work with people from around the world are all convinced they're in some stage of adaptation, but that's not always the case, because really the best way to get there is through intentional learning and doing the work. Such important work of understanding yourself, understanding concepts around culture and difference, and then using those to adjust and flex your own style. So I have some colleagues that very often equate, right? How do we understand mindsets in real time, right? Minimization is all lives matter, right? Acceptance is being able to recognize Black Lives Matter, right? And so when we think about where we are today as a community or society, recognize that everybody's in their own statement. And the more they learn, the more they know, the further they'll advance in their understanding of difference. But it's a journey for all of us. And I know that's incredibly difficult because we are in such difficult times. But I know that this paradigm, this model has really helped me think about as a facilitator, as a trainer, as a friend, as a family member, and as a mentor. My job isn't to move somebody out of polarization to adaptation, but just move them from polarization to minimization, one step at a time. And this intentional learning can be really powerful. So here's what we know. In 2017 and 2018, only 6% of African American college students studied abroad. And we know that the numbers for non-white students are significantly lower than their white counterparts. These numbers that we get here from the National Center for Education Statistics, from Open Door, who does a lot of research on study abroad, that we see here that there is a huge call to increase diversity for students going abroad, and opportunities for intercultural learning. And so what does this mean to students and to those of you who are committed to creating international learning experiences for all of your students? Well, I want to share some important things that we can do to make a difference. Mentors create opportunities to learn. So here in this top image is me just a couple years ago with Bonnie. Bonnie Bishop was my high school English teacher who told me that I could have a career and life living and working abroad. It was Bonnie who took me to Spain and gave me that opportunity, who coached me around what it was like to learn Spanish and live in another country, and mentored me into a career that has resulted in me having the opportunity to live in Canada for 6 years, Ireland for 5, Korea for, and have a wealth of friends and experiences from all over the world. She believed me, and she made it possible. She made it possible for me to believe that I could live and work abroad. My mother made it possible through the opportunities that she created and supported in me having. And so for those of you who are have people in your life that you want to inspire and mentor, it can be really powerful powerful to help people understand and believe that a life that may seem out of reach is possible. I was really fortunate enough to connect with Bonnie and other mentors that I had when I was young that have really shaped my life, and to them, and to tell them how impactful those small conversations they had with me had on my life. I think that's something for all of us to remember, is that sometimes mentoring isn't about a long process or investing a lot of time and energy, but sometimes it's about the small conversations. Sometimes it's just about believing in people, and also sometimes about helping to create the opportunity and supporting the opportunity. Too often I hear from people that they want to go abroad and their family wants them to go. And while I certainly know that my family has missed me in all the times that I've lived abroad, I know that I've had dying support, and that has made all the difference in the world, even when my times abroad weren't going so great. And having role models is so key. I have had some really incredible friends, colleagues, models that have modeled a global life, that have inspired me even when I wasn't living abroad, back home, to be connected with international communities, to pursue opportunities to work internationally and finance globally and speak on international platforms. And I could not have done it without having mentors that were both visible, or role models that were both visible, and supported and created opportunities for me to engage. So I think that too often, sometimes in our own professions, we can get really caught up in our own experience, but opening the doors for other people and creating opportunities for other people is what creates access. So often people say, well, it is harder to get, students from different ethnic and racial groups because of financial barriers. But the reality is some of the barriers there aren't financial. This kind of deficit mindset isn't helpful, because very often there's lots of ways in which students can go abroad and have that paid for. And lots of students of color need to travel. But it is about knowing that it's possible. It's about having the opportunities in front of them and getting the support from mentors and role models. I know for myself that I have done what I can to be a role model for my friends and peers, in showing them what a life living and working abroad can look like, and try to make it as accessible as possible, by not making it seem like it's something that you've got to be particularly special to have, because in reality, I don't feel particularly special, but I feel like I had mentors that told me it was possible and made it possible. And I think one of the last things that's really important is preparation. So whether you are somebody who works with international students, or you're someone who's aspiring to be an international student, research is so important. Understanding what it takes in terms of, if you're looking to study abroad, do research. If you're looking to work abroad or volunteer abroad, do the research. I used to spend hours when I was writing letters requesting information to get booklets and brochures on all the different opportunities there were for me to live, study, and work abroad. Today, it's a much easier thing to do because you can Google it. But I know back in my day, I used to spend hours writing requests for information and then going through the pages to figure out what was going to be the best opportunity, whether it was going to be Peace Corps or, taking a job. I explored them all, I did them all. And the more I pursued, the more opportunities I had, so that I had choices in front of me. And learning is such a key process, right? Whether you're doing the research and learning around intercultural understanding and communication, or whether you're doing learning of a foreign language or a specific culture. Over the years, I've met people who've had, had an experience in one country, and then that country became a place where they became an expert in that country's culture and language, and shared that love and passion with the entire world. Just last spring, I was able to travel to Ukraine, and I was able to have that experience because somebody who had Ukraine earlier in their life loved it so much that they've dedicated so much of their life bringing people to Ukraine to see what that country is like. And it was amazing, and I was grateful for that experience. And to connect. We live in a world today where you have the ability to connect with people from all over the world. And I encourage people to make those connections. Use LinkedIn, use Facebook, find the other groups and connect with people around the world and make those connections. Those connections are going to help facilitate those experiences abroad. If you're an educator or a mentor, make those connections for young people. If they don't have immediate role mentors in their life, connect them to role models and mentors that you know are going to make a difference. I probably have mentoring conversations a week with people who connect with me or people who get connected to me to share with people my own experience of international life and the path that I've taken and the career that I've built. And so being a mentor and be a role model for others is something that I really pride myself on and encourage other people to do. So often we have stories and we keep them to ourselves and we don't share. So I always encourage people to share those stories. And so say that I am so grateful to everybody for being here today and allowing me to share my story with all of you. I would love to questions for those of you who are watching, or answer some of the questions that have come in as we've been talking.
I must say, Tamara, that you have excited our audience. I have a stream of questions. I'm going to try very hard to respect everyone's time, but like I said, you've engendered so much excitement in the audience. So let's start with one of the questions that came in. It's about the country, region, or city you would like to visit, but you just haven't been there yet. And why is that the place you want to go?
Wow. Well, there is a very long list of places that I would like to visit. I actually have a map on my wall and all the places that I would like to go to. But I think that Vietnam is a place that I would like to visit that I haven't been to yet. I currently have a couple of friends that are living there, and I watch on Facebook, and I'm so very interested in seeing what that's like. As I know, I've lived in Korea and I've traveled to Thailand and Indonesia, but Vietnam is a place that I've been particularly interested in visiting. I think growing up in the U.S., we learn about Vietnam in a very specific and narrow way, and I think so much of what the country and culture has to offer has been missed. And so I think I'd love the opportunity to have a different narrative about the country and culture and all that it has to offer.
Thank you for that. You just excited me again. So here's a question, though, where I think what we're really asking for is some advice. What would you have as a message to the U.S. higher education leaders when it comes to helping them see the importance of increasing our resources, infusing resources into international education and study abroad? What can you tell our leaders?
I think one of the things that we're seeing today is we live in a far more globalized world. I live here in Dublin, Ireland, just 2 kilometers from the Silicon Docks. The Silicon Docks is the area that is home to 11 Google offices, Facebook, Pinterest, YouTube, you name it. If it's in Silicon Valley, they have their European headquarters right here in Dublin. And the majority of their staff come from all over the world and the US. And we no longer live in a world where we have the luxury of not having cultural competence and global leadership skills. So many companies today require there to have a global mindset. And so I think if we understand that higher education is about preparing the nation for the future, that part of that education is preparing them to work on global teams, and global and virtual teams, and to be able to lead teams that come from all over the world. As part of I train leaders from Fortune 100 companies every week. And so many of them are from the U parts training or leading teams in other parts of the world. So whether you're a doctor or in sales or in tech, these are skills that only make students more prepared for the work.
That's wonderful. I'll try and get a phone number for you. So no, absolutely amazing, because as much as we love local, everything is global now. I just have to agree with you on that. So then I'm going to follow that up with a question from someone in the audience who said, well, what about someone who's never traveled abroad or traveled in general? Where do they start? How do they connect with a mentor? Because like I said, you fired something up in this audience. So help.
So I would say a couple of things. I always say when you're looking for a mentor, you start with your closest circle, right? So whether that's somebody in your friend network, your family network, if it's someone within your organization or your institution, look for people right where you are. I think that is a really powerful way. So if you've never thought about doing traveling before, you don't know where to start, I think that there are some international student events happening in your institution, your university, that you can plug in and to meet people who have already, who come to the US to study, to work, to travel. So I would say start where you are at. If you have that one friend that studied abroad, to do that. The next that I would say is we live in a digital world. And there is so much information and access online. And then there's also LinkedIn is a really powerful platform. And I always encourage people to use LinkedIn to network. If you want to know where people are networking virtually, it is on LinkedIn. And also, one of the things that I do is I host events, and I host mentoring events both in person and virtually. I'll be having another one in the fall. I don't have a date yet, but these mentoring events, it will be a virtual mentoring event, are designed to bring young people, whether you're a student or early in your career, together with seasoned professionals, so that you have the opportunity to talk with someone about a career or some other aspiration you have. So I always invite people to go to my website, sign up for my mailing list, and you'll get information about my next virtual mentoring event.
Okay. That is great. So please sign up for her website. And as Tamara's saying, right here in Maricopa County, at CGC, actually, you have our International Education Office. So please, please, please grab your email, send an email, ask questions, because even if you don't have someone from that office that you care to choose as a mentor, Tamara just told you there are resources online. And as we move through that continuum that she discussed, we've got to start being intentional. So, okay, check it out. Let me ask another question that's coming from a place of concern, okay? What can white educators do to encourage and support Black marginalized students in traveling or participating in intercultural education experiences? So I really believe that comes from a place of heartfelt concern. How can people help? How can white educators help?
I think allyship is crucial. For me, I see this as a way of allyship and advocacy. And I think it starts with white educators educating themselves about the Black experience and what opportunities and barriers there may be, right? So, one, when we know what barriers are, it's easier to address. When we know what the opportunities are, they're easier to offer. So this is a don't make any assumptions, right? So that I mentioned, right? Just because a student comes from an underrepresented community doesn't mean that the barrier is going to be financial. So we have to be really mindful that when we're talking with students, assuming what the barriers are, but we might be asking what the barriers are. So to ask questions before you make assumptions. There are tons of efforts with different organizations to increase opportunities for Black students, particularly in other marginalized groups, to study abroad. There's the wonderful movement, it's called the Passport Project, and it is designed to get young Black girls to apply for their passport at very young age, so that they're inspired to travel by having their passport. There are other nonprofit organizations that have resources. So I think white educators need to educate themselves about the opportunities, to talk with students in those mentoring conversations to find out what the barriers are. It also may require white educators to partner with their international education office and find out what's available through the international education office. And I also think that, as I said, my friend Kelly, she who's been a huge role model to me, shares a quote from one of her favorite role models, Pi, that says the shortest distance between two strangers is a story. And sometimes, you like that one?
You're telling us a story this week. You're going to be one of our books. I love it. That's why I'm like, what synchronicity.
Yeah. Yes. And so I think when people share our story, it can be really powerful. Sometimes we hold back about what we do because we think people are intimidated or not interested. But I think that sharing our stories and experiences are really powerful, and I encourage people to do that.
Oh my goodness. That's so wonderful. Yes, everybody in the audience, tune in. Is it Wednesday? Look at the schedule. There are
Tomorrow.
plenty of schedules. It's tomorrow. It's Tuesday. Tamara's going to share a story with us. So make sure you check the Living Library and you'll get to hear some more wonderful information from her, because today's just been great. I think before someone gives me the hook, I have time to ask you one more question. Like I said, the audience has really sent numerous questions, but being respectful of people's time, I'm going to give you this question and elaborate. What place did you enjoy most? Can you pick one?
So I have had a blast all over the world, but I have to say that still to this day, France holds a very special, warm place in my heart, particularly Paris. There's something about that place. I talk with people about it, particularly people who have traveled and lived abroad, is sometimes you go to a place and that place, without any effort, feels like home. And Paris, France is one of those is that for me. So sometimes when I think about where's a place I can envision myself living out the rest of my life, I can see that happening in France for sure.
Well, thank you for your candor on that. Some people would have equivocated, but I'm so glad you shared what's real. At this point, what I would like to do is give you the opportunity to just share one more thing, if you would, with all of us, and then I will turn it back over to Kathleen. Whatever you'd like to share.
I just want to, well, I would just like to thank everybody again for watching, to thank both you and Kathleen for the wonderful invitation. And again, invite the audience to follow me on Facebook, connect with me on LinkedIn. Please remember to visit my website, which is tamarathorpe.com, and join my mailing list to find out about my next mentoring event. And if your curiosity has been piqued and the idea of learning about culture, intercultural communication, or living and working abroad has inspired you, I invite you to do the research, learn, and make those connections.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Kathleen.
Much as we did. Thank you so much, Tamara, for joining us. I know it's a huge 8 or 9 hour time difference. We so appreciate everything that you have shared with us today, some major insights that will help us be better global citizens ourselves in the future. So thank you again for joining us. And I do look forward to your story tomorrow as part of the Living Library that CGCC will be hosting as well. And the chats show the event website for all other International Ed Week events throughout the whole district. Please join us for future events. And thanks again for coming, everyone. We were excited to have you here.